Welcome to episode 14 of The Evidence Room. Inside every investigation, the truth is hidden in the evidence. Tonight we explore one of Italy's most mysterious and controversial disappearance cases. After the Monster of Florence, this is our second case based in Italy. And for you listening at home, I want you to start by picturing something. Just like, imagine living inside a walled medieval fortress right in the middle of a modern European capital.
Right, which is already hard to picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're guarded by an elite private army. You are surrounded by priceless Renaissance art. And the crime rate in your neighborhood is technically zero. Now imagine vanishing from that fortress without a trace.
Yeah, it sounds like the setup to, a locked room mystery novel, but it is entirely real. That fortress is Vatican City, and the person who vanished is a 15-year-old girl named Emanuela Orlandi.
Wow.
And over the past 40 years, her disappearance has spiraled into what we could accurately call the Kennedy assassination of the Vatican. It is just this labyrinth of sovereign immunity, international espionage, and financial corruption.
Like, where every new piece of evidence seems designed not to illuminate the truth, but to actively obscure it.
Exactly. Our mission today on this deep dive is to untangle that web.
So, to understand the sheer impossibility of this case, we really have to look at the mechanics of Emanuela's daily life. She was the fourth of 5 children, and her father, Ercole, was a lay employee in the papal household.
Right, and because of his job, the Orlandi family were actual citizens of Vatican City, which is super rare.
Yeah, for most of us, growing up means, riding bikes down suburban cul-de-sacs.
Yeah.
But for the Orlandi kids, their backyard was literally the Pope's private gardens. They had the free run of the place.
And that detail is so crucial because of the legal and physical reality of Vatican City. I mean, we're talking about a sovereign microstate. It is just over 100 acres, completely surrounded by high stone walls, and intensely monitored.
You have to pass through multiple Swiss Guard checkpoints just to get inside.
Precisely. Emanuela's older brother, Pietro, later summarized the family's mindset with a quote that really anchors the tragedy of this whole case. He said, "We thought we were in the safest place in the world."
Which makes total sense. I mean, how does someone get abducted from the most exclusive, heavily guarded 100 acres on Earth?
Well, the timeline starts on June 22, 1983. It's a sweltering, hot Roman summer day.
Like, those summers are brutal.
Yeah, and Emanuela is heading to her flute lesson at a music school just outside the Vatican walls over near Piazza Navona.
And here is where a deeply mundane, everyday interaction turns into, well, a lifetime of trauma. She was running late, it was incredibly hot, and she asked her brother Pietro for a ride.
And he was busy with other things, so he just said no.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you have siblings, you've had this exact interaction 100 times. You say no because it's inconvenient.
Yeah, it's just a normal sibling thing.
Right. But for Pietro, that single no became a lifelong burden. He has spent 4 decades agonizing over the fact that if he had just driven her, she would still be here.
The psychological weight of that is just unimaginable. But let's look at the mechanics of what actually happened next. Emanuela takes the bus. She goes to her lesson. Afterward, around 7:00 p.m., she calls her sister, Federica.
And during this call, Emanuela casually mentions that a representative for Avon Products had approached her on the street, right?
Yeah, offering her a job handing out flyers at a fashion show. And the pay being offered was astronomical for just a few hours of teenage gig work.
Which is always suspicious. And Federica immediately recognized the red flags. She told Emanuela to, come home and talk to their parents before agreeing to anything.
But she never makes it home. Around 7:10 p.m., she's seen at a bus stop near the Italian Senate building, talking to a man with an Avon bag.
And nearby is a dark green BMW, which is the last time she has ever seen.
Naturally, when she doesn't come home, the family panics. They go to the local authorities, and the initial response is just horrific.
Yeah, the police essentially tell the father to go home and wait. They just chalk it up to a teenage runaway situation. Why is it that in so many historical true crime cases, the initial police instinct is just to brush off the family?
Well, it was unfortunately standard operating procedure in the early 1980s. Missing persons protocols were pretty chaotic. But while the institutional police force dragged its feet, there was one proactive intelligence agent named Giulio Gonghi.
Oh, right. He was a friend of the family.
Exactly. He didn't wait. He immediately started interviewing witnesses, got the description of that dark green BMW, and actually tracked it down to a local mechanic shop.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
He actually found the exact car from the bus stop.
He did, and the physical evidence was incredibly alarming. One of the windows had been broken from the inside.
Oh my God. which strongly indicates someone was trapped inside and fighting to get out.
Yes, but this is where we hit our first massive roadblock. Before Gandhi could trace the registration or pull forensic evidence from the car, his superiors abruptly intervened and pulled him completely off the case.
Okay, why? The guy is literally doing the job the police refused to do.
To understand why, you really have to understand the jurisdictional black hole this case fell into. It's like if a crime happened on the sidewalk right outside the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C.
Right, like the local police can't just go barging in.
Exactly. The D.C. police can tape off the street, but the second the investigation points toward those gates, their badges are basically meaningless. Emanuela was a Vatican citizen, but she disappeared on Italian soil.
Ah, so the Italian authorities didn't want to step on the Vatican's toes, and the Vatican claimed it was a Roman police matter.
Spot on. This created a deliberate paralysis. And because the authorities were locked in this jurisdictional staring contest, the family had to act on their own.
Yeah, they launched a massive public poster campaign across Rome. But when you put your home phone number on thousands of posters, you open the floodgates to a bizarre cast of characters.
The phone call started pouring in. At first, it was a guy calling himself Pierluigi, who accurately described Emanuela's flute and her specific eyeglasses.
And he claimed she was calling herself Barbarella and selling Avon, right?
Right. And then another guy named Mario called, claiming he saw her. But these weren't just random crackpots. We need to look at how these callers operated.
They deployed a terrifying level of insider knowledge.
Yeah, like for example, one caller casually mentioned being at a specific seaside restaurant outside of Rome. Investigators quickly realized that one of Emanuela's close friends from the Vatican happened to be eating at that exact restaurant on that exact night.
How does a random kidnapper know that? I mean, did someone in the Vatican lead her personal networks to the kidnappers?
It strongly suggests either high-level surveillance or that the perpetrators had access to the Vatican's own internal phone switchboards. The callers were carefully monitoring the family's inner circle.
Which is terrifying. And then the psychological warfare escalated.
It really did. A caller, dubbed the American because of his distinct accent, played an audio cassette over the phone. It was a recording of a young girl, allegedly Emanuela, crying out while seemingly being tortured.
That is just pure evil.
Yeah.
To force a family to listen to that.
It's designed to break them, to force capitulation. But if we analyze the evidence objectively, we have to question the tape's authenticity. Years later, a former agent who analyzed that audio claimed the recording released to the public had been heavily manipulated.
Wait, really? Manipulated how?
Background voices were edited out. The mechanism of this call wasn't just cruelty, it was a highly sophisticated fabrication designed to establish dominance and force a negotiation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we see this major pivot in the case. From a local missing teen case, we suddenly jump to the global geopolitical stage.
Yes. The American doesn't ask for money. She demands a prisoner exchange.
He wants the release of Mehmet Ali Aska. And for you listening who might not know the name, Aska was the Turkish man who shot Pope John Paul II in St. Peter's Square back in 1981.
So, suddenly, the kidnappers are claiming they are an international terrorism organization. An alleged group calling itself the Turkish Liberation Front started sending letters.
But they never sent any actual proof of life, right?
No, but they did include hyper-specific, deeply disturbing medical details about Emanuela's body, like the exact number and placement of moles on her back.
Again, how do they get that information?
Yeah.
Are we supposed to believe international terrorists took her to a dermatologist?
Exactly. The mechanics don't add up at all. Which is why intelligence analysts eventually concluded the Turkish group was entirely fake.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, former spies have come forward to explain this was likely an elaborate Cold War disinformation campaign known as Operation Pabst. Here's how it worked. In 1981, when the Pope was shot, the trail of evidence was leading directly back to the Soviet KGB.
Because they feared the Pope's influence over anti-communist movements in Poland, right?
Exactly. So when Emanuela vanished 2 years later, the East German Stasi and the KGB saw a golden opportunity. They basically hijacked the kidnapping narrative.
So they didn't even need to be the ones who kidnapped her? They just needed to claim they did, to flood the media with letters demanding the release of a Turkish assassin.
Right, to distract the world from the fact that the Soviet bloc was behind the Pope's assassination attempt.
And they likely just bribed someone in a Roman hospital to get Emanuela's medical records to make the letters look authentic. They used a 15-year-old girl as a pawn in a geopolitical chess match.
Precisely. But as the intelligence community realized the Cold War terrorism angle lacked physical proof, the investigation was forced to look closer to home. They had to follow the money.
And that led them straight into the criminal underworld. This is where the story gets so surreal it's hard to process.
It really does.
Years later, an anonymous tip leads police to a crypt inside a major Roman basilica. And when they open it, they find the tomb of Enrico de Pettis.
Who is definitely not a cardinal or a saint.
No, he was one of the most ruthless, violent mafia bosses in Roman history. Imagine finding Al Capone buried in St. Patrick's Cathedral. That's essentially what happened.
And the public outrage was massive, but we have to ask why a mobster was buried in a sacred basilica in the first place. The answer is financial leverage.
Right, because of his ex-girlfriend's testimony.
Yes, Sabrina Minardi. She came forward with explosive testimony. She claimed the mafia kidnapped Emanuela on the direct orders of Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, the head of the Vatican Bank.
Okay, let's break down the Vatican Bank, because this is the engine driving this entire theory. The Vatican Bank isn't like a normal commercial bank. It's a sovereign financial institution.
It answers only to the Pope.
Exactly, which means in the 1980s, it completely bypassed international banking regulations. No audits, no external oversight. If you are a mafia boss pulling in millions in illicit cash, the Vatican Bank is the ultimate offshore tax haven located right in the middle of Rome.
And according to Minardi and financial investigators, the mafia funneled their money into the Vatican Bank to launder it. But the Vatican allegedly took those mafia funds and secretly funneled them to the Solidarity movement in Poland to fight communism.
Oh, wow. So when the Vatican's front bank spectacularly collapsed in the early 80s, the mafia's money just vanished.
Yep.
And you can't exactly sue the Holy See in a civil court. So the mob needed leverage. They needed to force the Vatican to pay them back.
And what better leverage than kidnapping a citizen of the Vatican itself? It's a brutal transactional power game. But as horrific as that theory is, there are even darker claims out there.
Unfortunately, yes. Father Gabriel Amorth, who was the Vatican's own former chief exorcist, publicly claimed Emanuela was pulled into a horrific sex ring involving Vatican police and foreign diplomats.
And recently, an audio recording of an old mob affiliate surfaced, claiming Emanuela was taken specifically to cover up a massive scandal inside the Vatican.
Not to mention the chilling detail from a recent Netflix documentary. A childhood friend of Emanuela's claimed that just days before she vanished, Emanuela confided she had been sexually molested in the Vatican gardens by someone very close to Pope John Paul II.
Now, I know what you're thinking at home. You're thinking this sounds like the plot of a cheap thriller novel. It's almost too sensational. But you have to remember, this isn't some anonymous internet conspiracy theorist making these claims. No, it's the Vatican's own chief exorcist and people intimately connected to the Orlandi family.
So why are insiders actively fanning these flames?
Because the silence of the institution creates a vacuum. And in a vacuum, every theory, no matter how terrifying, gains traction. You also have convicted killers like Mark Gauchetti stepping forward to claim they orchestrated the whole thing.
And then there's the infamous VatiLeaks document, right?
Yeah, supposedly leaked internal dossiers suggesting the Vatican secretly funded Emanuela's life in a London youth hostel for 14 years, paying her medical bills before returning her remains to Rome.
Which the Vatican dismissed as a crude forgery, but it perfectly illustrates the deep institutional mistrust at play. It's a maze of smoke and mirrors.
It really is.
And through 4 decades of this, Pietro Orlandi has been fighting a stone wall. We talked about that jurisdictional black hole earlier, how the Vatican just brushed off the Italian police. But how does an independent city-state get away with ignoring a murder investigation in its own backyard?
Well, behind the scenes, we now know they were actually deeply concerned. The wall of silence wasn't passive, it was actively managed.
Right, the secret negotiations in 2012.
Yes. A former Roman prosecutor named Giancarlo Capaldo revealed that he was engaged in secret negotiations with Vatican emissaries. The public was furious about the mob boss, De Pettis, being buried in the basilica.
Obviously.
So the Vatican emissaries wanted Capaldo to quietly authorize the removal of the tomb to end the PR nightmare. Capaldo agreed, but he demanded a quid pro quo.
He would move the mobster, but only if the Vatican handed over their secret files on Emanuela, dead or alive. A literal trade for the truth.
He had them cornered.
But then the deal just inexplicably evaporates.
Basically, yes. Capaldo was suddenly removed from his position and replaced by a prosecutor who just ordered the tomb removed anyway, asking nothing in return.
Unbelievable.
The promised Vatican documents never materialized. The institutional machinery simply bypassed the threat.
Which leads us to one of the most bizarre moments in this entire saga. In 2019, the Orlandi family receives an anonymous tip, a photo of an angel statue in the Vatican cemetery, with a note saying, "Search where the angel looks."
The angel's crypt search.
Right. And the Vatican actually agrees to open the tombs. So picture this. They bring in the forensic teams, the media is watching, they pry open the graves of two 19th century princesses, expecting to find Emanuela.
And the tombs are completely empty.
Nothing. Not even the princesses who were supposed to be buried there for over a century. Just a modern, reinforced concrete room. So what does this all mean?
It's baffling.
If the Vatican knew those tombs were empty, why on earth would they agree to a highly publicized exhumation? Wouldn't that just make them look incredibly guilty of cover-up?
That is the paradox of dealing with the Vatican. It is not a single, unified monolith. It is a collection of fiercely guarded, highly siloed factions.
So the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
Exactly. It is entirely possible that the faction that authorized the opening of the tombs genuinely believed they would find the princesses, completely unaware that another faction had cleared out those crypts decades earlier during a renovation.
Wow.
It really highlights the internal fragmentation, but for the family, it was just another devastating illusion.
The floor drops out from under them again, but the public pressure didn't stop. In fact, it culminated in a massive shift in 2023.
Yeah, bringing us right up to recent developments. For the first time in 40 years, the Vatican finally opened its own official investigation into Emanuela's disappearance.
And the Rome prosecutors quickly followed suit, and the Italian parliament approved a bicameral commission with subpoena power.
It felt like a breakthrough. But almost immediately, the shadow game is resumed. Right as the parliamentary commission was gaining momentum, a highly suspicious, decades-old document was leaked to the Italian media.
Oh, the uncle smear.
Yeah. This document implicated Emanuela's own deceased uncle, Mario Meneguzzi. It revealed that in 1978, 5 years before Emanuela vanished, the uncle had made a verbal, unwanted advance toward Emanuela's older sister, Natalina.
The leak was clearly designed to strongly imply that the uncle was a predator and the true culprit all along. It is such a transparent PR counteroffensive.
Exactly. Natalina had to hold a public press conference just to defend her family's name. She confirmed the 1978 incident happened, but made it clear it was a verbal advance that she immediately shut down.
But more importantly, let's look at the actual timeline mechanics. Natalina pointed out that her uncle was completely cleared by Italian investigators back in 1983 because he was literally out of town.
Right, on a family vacation far from Rome on the exact day Emanuela disappeared.
It's a classic distraction tactic. When an institution panics, it deploys whatever dirt it has in its archives to shift the media narrative and cast blame onto the grieving family itself.
It's a defensive maneuver designed to run out the clock on the parliamentary inquiry.
But it's important to remember that while Emanuela's case is a masterclass in institutional cover-ups, she is not alone.
No, we really need to zoom out and look at the broader context. Italy currently has over 88,000 unresolved missing persons cases.
88,000, that's just staggering.
Emanuela has become the national symbol for all of them. She represents the agonizing lack of closure, the jurisdictional black holes, and the institutional apathy that thousands of other families navigate every single day.
And the Orlandi family has very real reasons to believe the institution knows exactly what happened. Back in 2013, shortly after Pope Francis was elected, he met Pietro Orlandi and his mother after a mass.
And that's when the infamous whisper happened.
Yeah, he leaned in and whispered to them, "Emanuela is in heaven." Now, Pietro didn't take that as a comforting pastoral blessing. He took it as an absolute, undeniable admission of fact.
Right, logic dictates that if the Pope knows she is in heaven, the Vatican knows she is dead.
Yet, despite Pietro practically begging for a follow-up meeting to ask what exactly the Pope meant by that, Pope Francis has refused to ever speak with him again.
It leaves you grappling with a truly haunting reality. I mean, we've talked about the mafia, Cold War spies, and secret tribunals, but what if the greatest secret of the Vatican isn't hidden in a forgotten underground archive or buried in an empty crypt? What if it is simply protected day in and day out by the silence of the men who walk its halls every single day?
Thanks for listening to The Evidence Room. If you enjoyed this episode, like and subscribe for more true crime investigations from around the world. Remember, some cases remain unsolved, but the evidence always tells a story.